In high school, one of our classes went to a funeral home. While listening to the guide talk about the cremation machine, this girl in the class turns to me, points at the machine then to me, and says that's going to be you. She was mean for no reason. I never talked to her ever before or after that. A year later, she died in a house fire, and then what was left was fully cremated in that same machine. Crazy. When I was 18, I was drugged by a 6 feet something, probably 200 plus lb dude. He offered me a white substance, and I at the time struggling with addiction and was known to say yes to anything. I had done some drugs with him before, but it hadn't been anything I couldn't handle. I did a line and immediately lost control of all of my limbs. What I thought was cocaine, which he knew that's what I thought was actually MXE. Basically, horse tranquilizers. He intentionally withheld that information from me. He knew what it was going to do to me. The reason I know it was intentional is that the other women to whom he had done the exact same thing shared their stories with me. He used those moments to take advantage of the fact that I literally couldn't move and raped me. I can remember trying my hardest to move my arms and hands to push him away, but no matter how hard I tried, they wouldn't move. Later, I learned the amount he gave me could have killed me, and I'm super lucky I didn't die. As I made my escape, he was chilling in his hammock. I still couldn't feel my arms, but ended up driving myself home through the middle of a valley with a big river running through and up a mountain. Thankfully, I made it home without crashing, but I was forever changed. He even stalked me for a week. I was so scared for a long time. This story ends with the bad guy dying from an overdose at a party almost 10 years later. So I was about 8 at the time. It was something like 1 or 2 in the morning. I go to the bathroom. It is rather bright outside despite the time. I'm sitting on the toilet, playing with the curtain. It comes up enough and I see a shadow standing outside the window. I scream and my mom comes running. I tell her there is someone standing outside the bathroom window. Now my mom is the crazy woman she is, throws open the curtain, opens the window, ready to fight a mother ducker. A guy outside the window. Nope, a ducking bear. The window is promptly shut, and I'm quickly ushered out of the bathroom. This event furthers the talk my parents had been having off and on about moving. On a side note, we moved about 2 years later for a number of other reasons. Funny enough, there is now a bear roaming this neighborhood. He's been spotted on my parents' front porch at least twice now. When I was around 14 years old, we had a neighbor 2 houses down that were foster parents. I always heard about them putting some of the troubled kids in cages as punishment and having them sleep on concrete. My friends and I would talk about it but never believed it to be true. One day, the FBI was everywhere up and down the block, closing off the street. We found out that one of the kids was acting up and wouldn't calm down, so they zip-tied him to a chair in the basement. When he wouldn't stop screaming, they put a zip tie around his neck to scare him into being quiet. They tightened it right away and ended up killing him. They found the boy buried in the basement under newly poured concrete. When I was a teenager, I went to drive to a friend's house when it was dark, and before I could exit our neighborhood, 2 cars pulled in from the main street, each taking a lane and stopping, intentionally blocking the exit. I had come to a stop about 50 feet away, just trying to figure out what was going on. After a few seconds, they both accelerated in my direction. I threw it in reverse and did my best to back away, but I realized pretty quickly that 1, they would catch up to me, or 2, I was going to wreck my car and they would still catch up to me, so I went with option 1 and stopped on my own. They drove up and boxed me in against the curb. Both cars had 4 adult men in them. The driver of the car next to me angrily shouted at me. Both our windows were down. "Where's Caroline?" Confused, I just said, "What?" With even more anger, he asked about Caroline again. This time I just said, "Who?" At that, he relaxed, calmed his voice, and said, "Oh, wrong person. Sorry," and drove on. The other car followed him and also said an apology out of their window as they drove by. I was shaken up for a minute, but just drove on to my friends after that. It took me a few years to realize there was someone else in my neighborhood who drove the same make, model, and even color car as mine, and it was a relatively obscure type of car. So that's probably why they were so sure of themselves that I was whoever they were looking for. I live in Costa Rica, and about a year ago, 2 Danish tourist girls in their late teens got a tuk-tuk back to their hotel from a bar in town. It was about 8 p.m., so not late. The tuk-tuk driver suddenly took a turn off the road and took the girls down a dark lane to a deserted piece of beach, and there a boatload of his buddies were waiting. They raped and beat the girls repeatedly until 4 in the morning when they left them for dead on the beach. One managed to get up and in her fright and shock, ran naked into the jungle and got lost. They didn't find her until after midday, the next day, suffering from exhaustion and dehydration on top of her considerable injuries. The other one made it up onto the main road and stumbled into a cafe where they called the police. What's worse is that the police showed up and didn't take her seriously, saying that she was probably drunk and it was her own fault. The local population was up in arms and subsequently boycotted the tuk-tuks. There were demonstrations and eventually the police confiscated all the tuk-tuks and sent more police to the area. We now have a new police station. The previous one was a broken down old bus with 2 outside toilets with bars on them for holding cells, and there has been a crackdown on sexual violence in the area. Typically though, the gang that attacked these poor girls were never apprehended despite it being common knowledge in town who it was. Used to hang out in a field near some forests when I was younger. One time it was about midnight. One of my friends had recently had some love triangle type trouble and the other guy involved wanted to fight him quite badly. Somehow he found out where my friend liked to hang out and rounded up about 10 of his friends to come to find him, and I'm guessing beat the shit out of him. I, unfortunately, happened to be there too. We saw about 4 cars park up on the road near the field and about 10 guys get out. I'm guessing they saw one of our phone lights because the next thing we know they shine what I can only describe as an industrial flashlight toward us. We just hear he's right ducking there. So we ran into the forest at 12 at night in the pitch black. It started to pour rain. For an hour we hid in bushes and crept around the forest, avoiding them as light from their torches shone through the trees. At times they'd walk right past us but not able to see us because we were face down in the bushes in mud law. I was the victim of a manhunt, and it was terrifying. Got home at about 2 a.m. soaking and covered in mud. They never caught us though, all over a love triangle I wasn't bloody involved in. The scariest thing that ever happened to me. Many years ago, pre-cell phone, a friend of mine got a call from the police, "Lock your doors, hide, we're on our way over." Her angry ex had hired someone to break into her house, make it look like a burglary gone bad, and kill her. Through a bizarre coincidence with equally bizarre timing, someone arrested for another unrelated drug charge offered a bigger fish if they let him walk. The bigger fish was that his buddy had been hired to kill her. By the time they validated the story and identified the people, they were able to determine that the hired killer was likely already on the way to her house. In the few minutes between the phone call and the police arrival, he had started breaking into the house. A long sequence of perfectly timed unlikely events was the only thing that stood between her and certain death. My closet door flew open one night during a thunderstorm, directly across from my bed. I was 12 years old, and the leap I made from my bed was probably pretty impressive. I couldn't sleep in my room for about 2 weeks after that happened. The reason it even happened in the first place is that I had discovered a small compartment in my closet to a secret room next to mine. Basically just an unfinished attic-type space with only wood beams and fiberglass. Again, through a weird small entry way in my closet, I didn't close the latch properly, and that panel banged up against and pushed open my closet door during a massive thunderstorm. It is near the closing of the Second World War. Despite defeat being near certainty, the German military makes the Allies pay for every inch of land gained with their blood. Just outside the Vosges Mountains, an American infantry platoon is under heavy assault by a well-coordinated and armed German advance. Several M10 tank destroyers were lending their aid on the American side, but they were dispatched by German Panzerschrecks, a type of anti-tank munition, forcing their crews to retreat one by one. Amid the chaos, one soldier sees that they are about to be overrun by a German advance. He orders the remaining US soldiers to make a break for the woods behind them. To cover their retreat, the soldier leaps and runs up to a burning tank destroyer, hopping atop it to man the .50 caliber machine gun, standing alone against a horde of oncoming Germans. This man's name was Audie Murphy, who 2 years earlier found himself being repeatedly rejected from his attempts to join the military due to only being 5'4" and being underweight. But due to the feelings of Pearl Harbor still resonating in him, he was convinced he needed to enlist, and by forging his birth certificate to appear older than he was 16 at the time. With the help of his sister, he was finally able to enlist. Back in college, coming home late Saturday night, I got stopped at a red light next to a Mustang with every seat full. Saw a car coming down the road with the green light, and it looked like it was going too fast. Our light turned green and I stayed put and honked at the Mustang. They stopped with their front end in the intersection just enough that speeding car ripped off the front end of their car as it blew the red light. Nobody got hurt in any car somehow. If I didn't see it, wasn't out that night, didn't bother to honk, could have been 5 dead people. Heard a story from a Vietnam vet about a fellow soldier who got shot in the head and held his brains in with his helmet until he got medical attention. Survived only to have a tree fall on his car randomly one day, years later, and kill him instantly. My grandmother was riding on a bus back in the 50s and 60s. There was a young mother and her infant riding in a seat one row ahead and to the right of her. My grandmother dozes off and is suddenly awakened by an intense crashing noise followed by a rapid whipping sound. All of a sudden, the mother starts screaming violently in the darkness of the back of the bus. It's not clear to my grandmother what happened. Turns out the mother and child were sitting above the wheel well of the bus. One of the tires failed and the steel-reinforced rubber tread separated from the majority of the wheel, yet it temporarily stayed attached to the sidewall somehow. The tread ripped a 3 inches hole through the wheel well and seat and tore the young infant through the opening. I'm 40 now, and my grandmother told me that story when I was 12 or so. I think we were talking about how random and unexpected death was and why you have to appreciate every moment.
Thanks for watching. Subscribe to stay tuned for more true stories.